Hello everyone and welcome to week 7. Today we'll be talking about community, economic, and social development. So in the past weeks we were kind of talking about how we identify problems within a community and then really start the planning process of solving those problems. This week we're kind of taking it a step forward to really see how those interventions are being implemented in the real world. And last week we also watched the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, and that's a really good example of a community economic and social development initiative. So think about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative when you're kind of listening to the lecture, and you're really will be able to see kind of how that's being applied in the real world with these kind of general ideas. So just a little background on what you kind of have going on. This is the outline. It's also on Blackboard, and I'll discuss the specific parts of this at the end as well. So just a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So first we'll just be talking about an overview of community development, different tools that communities have to develop their community, and then some very specific examples. So first, when we're talking about what is community development, so this is the idea where community members are coming together and they're taking collective action to really focus on specific common problems. The goal is that this is really a community-led initiative. So this is being led by the community members, and they are going to be identifying the problems within the community. What do they identify to be the problems, and how can we work together to solve this problem? The important thing to keep in mind, while a lot of social workers always think of clinical work as the primary job for social workers, a lot of social workers are also involved in community development projects, and a lot of community development projects are being led by social workers. So it's really important that we understand the basis for community development work, because there's a good chance that you're going to be involved in it in some way, shape, or form. So in general, community development is really any initiative to foster community well-being, whether that be economic, social, environmental, cultural well-being. And again, the activities are supported by the community stakeholders. And stakeholders for the community can include individuals, of course, the residents of the community. In general, when we have like community development corporations, which we'll talk about in a minute, about 1/3 of the board for the community development corporation should be comprised of residents of the community. So that's your first lecture question for this week. What percent of boards, community boards, should be comprised of residents? It should be about 1/3. The other part of the board is going to be represented by businesses, nonprofits, governments. These are all people who have an active stake in wanting to see that community prosper. If you think about businesses, of course, businesses want their communities to be safe. They want their residents to have high income to come support their businesses. So businesses have a really solid stake in watching the community grow. Nonprofits, of course, do as well. So a lot of nonprofits, if they're doing social service work, they can really see how so much of what the work they're doing, so much of social service work can really be solved through community development. So if nonprofits are working on trying to get their people jobs, if they're working with a community development corporation to try to bring jobs into that community, problem solved. I mean, they're going to see unemployment rates lower. So that's how we can really see a firm connection between nonprofit, social service sector, and community development corporations. The government, of course, also has a stake in the development in wanting to see their people prosper and have well-being, less crime, higher income, lower unemployment. All of these can really be solved at the broader community level. And you can see a lot of examples through the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. So the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative is one example of a community development corporation, and you're going to watch a webinar or listen to a webinar that discusses these in a little more detail. So these are also known as CDCs. This is a widely used acronym, not to be confused with the Center for Disease Control or Child development centers. Community Development Corporations, also known as the CDC, is a nonprofit. It's a community-based organization, and the goal of the CDC is to revitalize the area. So a lot of CDCs are located in low-income, underserved neighborhoods. So these are areas that would really benefit from bringing businesses into the area, revitalizing housing development in the area, just a wide variety of actions that need to be taken to really pull that neighborhood up. So you see community development corporations all over the place. You're probably not aware of how widespread these are, but there's community development corporations in a lot of different neighborhoods. There's probably one in your neighborhood and you might just not realize it. So just a little background on community development corporations. There's 4,600 located across the 50 states. So that's how many there are. I mean, that's a lot. So there's like 100 per state. I know in St. Louis there's about 20, and that's all over. If you've heard of like the Old North Redevelopment Corporation, the Grove Redevelopment Corporation, there's one on South Grand. So there's a lot in St. Louis, just a lot throughout the area. And again, most of them are in these underserved areas that could really benefit from some more income. One of the major things that community development corporations do is housing production. So they really help with housing and commercial space. So a big focus is building houses or providing more low-income houses in the neighborhood, while also working with businesses to pull businesses into the area. So when we're talking about commercial production, that's businesses. So that's retail space. So that's trying to incentivize businesses to come to the area. Because a lot of times in low-income neighborhoods, businesses don't necessarily want to go there. People don't have as high of income, so they can't afford to necessarily buy the products of the business. It might have higher crime, so businesses want to go to areas where they're not going to get their windows broken into. So it's really the job of the Community Development Corporation to try to pull back these businesses while also creating affordable housing for their residents. So you can kind of see just the huge number of housing units, the amount of commercial space that they were able to produce, the jobs that they created. They really do have a large stake in the housing and the business economy. So we really need to make sure that we're aware of them and utilizing them in our change efforts. There's a lot of tools that community development corporations have. So these are different ways that community development corporations can really enhance the well-being of a community. So we'll talk about each individual section. So that might include building human capital, physical capital, or financial capital. So let's start with human capital. Human capital, people. When we kind of thought about our needs assessment or our asset map, when we thought about our asset map a few weeks ago, you can kind of see how the assets of the community really play into the different tools that community development corporations have, because they really go hand in hand. So we have to think about what are the skills of the people, the skills, the knowledge, the experiences for the people who live in that community, for the general population, and how can these skills better the community? I mean, so many community members give back to their community. By having a population that has greater skills, we're going to be enhancing the well-being of the community. So there's a variety of ways that we can really impact the skill set of the people who live there. This might include job training programs. So maybe we provide people with training on being a nursing assistant, or training on a specific, working in a specific factory job, or being a plumber. It's really the job of the Community Development Corporation to identify, what jobs would really help people higher their income. So St. Louis, one of the St. Louis Development Corporations, has a training program in which they provide free of charge classes on becoming a nursing assistant, because they identified that nursing assistants is one of the higher paying jobs that doesn't require like having a bachelor's degree. So it's something that you can get a certificate and you can get a decent paying job by being a nursing assistant. So they provided these classes free of charge for people who live there. They provided childcare to go along with it. And I believe that people even got a stipend to really encourage them to take advantage of this job training program. So they were able to increase the income merely by getting these people a certificate for something specific. They can also increase the skills through mental health treatment, providing healthcare. Some community development corporations might bring in doctors, clinics to the area. If it's an area where they don't have a lot access to healthcare, that's going to be one thing where they're going to be pulling people in. Or maybe they're providing education to people about healthcare, how to take care of, just first aid, stuff like that. They might be providing education, so maybe they're working with the school systems to enhance those. Maybe they're providing childcare to individuals when they go to work. Financial management is a huge thing, especially in St. Louis. We're approaching a week where they have lots of financial management classes. I think it's called Money Smart Week. So if you're in St. Louis and you haven't heard of it, here, look up Money Smart Week. So I believe it's like the first week of April, and what it is there's like 200 classes throughout the St. Louis area in which people can receive training on financial management, balancing their budget, how to open a bank account, how to apply for a loan, how to look for houses, things that are really going to benefit them financially. And these are ways that we can enhance the skill set of the population, and it will better the entire community as a result. Physical capital is real estate. So a lot of this is housing. So this is where community development corporations might be building houses. So this is where the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative came in, and they physically built houses. They used eminent domain to take properties, and they built low-income housing or affordable housing on the land. And they were able to provide affordable housing to the residents. One of the major concerns anytime we're trying to strengthen the economy for a specific neighborhood is gentrification. So gentrification is the idea that let's say we have a really low-income neighborhood. When that neighborhood starts to get better, we see neighborhoods that are starting to turn around. They're getting business capital. They are getting better housing. The people who live there have more money. And so what happens is when neighborhoods start to get better, the housing prices start to go up. So what then happens is that the low-income residents get pushed out and the higher-income residents come in. So people who lived in the surrounding neighborhoods all of a sudden decide that this is the neighborhood to live in. So in St. Louis, we're seeing this a lot in the Tower Grove area. So Tower Grove used to be a higher crime area in St. Louis. Crime has been going down. There's been a lot of influx of businesses, influx of new housing. And as that's happened, some of the low-income residents were getting pushed out. Some of the new younger folks were moving in who weren't part of the older residents. So it's always something we want to be aware of. So kind of when we're thinking about real estate development, we need to kind of have that alongside of building up the skill set of our individuals as well, to make sure that if we're providing these new housing units, that the people who live there are going to be able to afford them rather than pushing them out. So real estate development can be anywhere from providing affordable housing to just kind of getting rid of abandoned housing. I watched a short video on a model that they did in Cleveland, where right around the recession, they had a lot of foreclosed housing. And that's a huge problem to have a lot of foreclosed housing in a neighborhood. What happens is if your neighbor isn't able to afford their mortgage, they foreclose, and the foreclosure of your neighbor is going to reduce the property value of your house. So that's a major problem because banks take them over. There's a lot of foreclosures. Banks don't have time to sell them all, so they sit there vacant. Grass is overgrown. People go in and steal from the houses. So they found that a lot of houses, these foreclosed houses in Cleveland, all of the copper all the copper pipes were stolen because no one was living there. They were easy to take. So what they actually did in Cleveland is one of the community development corporations bought up from the banks all of these foreclosed houses because they were super cheap, bought them all up, and they tore down the houses. They physically tore them down because they felt that by creating more green space, it made the houses who were still there look better than having like overgrown grass and these broken windows in these foreclosed houses. So they got rid of them to try to pull up the housing prices of the people who were still living there and who could afford their houses because their housing prices were just plummeting. To try to stabilize the area, that's one approach that they did. So there's a variety of tools that low-income neighborhoods or community development corporations have to really pull up the housing stock in their neighborhood, to try to pull in businesses, to try to pull in housing. I apologize, my emails pop up and they pull up on my PowerPoint. Okay, so some of the real estate the tools that they have are different tax incentives. So one is called the real estate tax abatement. So this is the idea that when you own a property, you have to pay property taxes on it. So if the property tax in St. Louis is $10,000 and my house and the land on it is assessed for $100,000, then I would have to pay, well, I think property tax might be like 1%. So I'm going to pay like $1,000 in property taxes per year. Okay, so when we have a lot of vacant land and we're trying to pull people in to build on it, one of the problems is your property tax is based on the assessed value of the land. Okay, so when you have vacant land with nothing on it, that's not worth a lot. When you build a house on it, it becomes worth a lot more. So you're going to be paying a higher property tax on a land with a house on it or a building than you would on a land with nothing on it. So real estate tax abatement is something that like Walmart has used a lot, and a lot of other corporations have used to kind of pull into these low-income neighborhoods. So what it is low-income, these are typically low-income communities, have so many kind of credits towards real estate tax abatement. So what it is it to pull in these commercial businesses. It tells them, okay, we'll sell this land to you, but we won't reassess the value of the land for another 10 years. So if Walmart comes in and they buy land for let's say $100,000, okay? So they would be paying like $1,000 in real estate, in the property tax based on that vacant land's price. When they're then building their Walmart on the land, the price of the land is gonna go up. So then they would have to pay more in property taxes. But the real estate tax abatement says, we're not gonna make you pay more in property taxes. We're gonna hold off on reassessing the value of the land for another 10 years. So it essentially reduces the cost of them building to try to pull in these commercial industries. So we see that a lot in low-income neighborhoods. It's not that they have like a million credits that they can just provide, but it is a tool that they can use to pull in commercial industries. The low-income housing tax credit is a tax that, again, low-income neighborhoods can provide to creditors, and it's to creditors who are specifically building houses, and they agree that a portion of the housing units are going to be rented out at what's considered affordable. So affordable is 30% of the area median income, okay? So that's your second lecture question, is what is considered affordable based on the low-income housing tax credit, and it's 30% of the area median income. So it's the idea that on average, people spend about 30% of their income on housing. So for individuals who kind of build houses with the low-income housing tax credits, they then are going to rent these housing units at an affordable price, which is equivalent to 30% of median area income. So if the median area income in my neighborhood is $30,000, I would then be able to, rent a house for $10,000 a year, whatever that works out to per month. So like $800 per month, something like that. So it's, again, just another incentive to kind of pull in these industries to build housing and rent them at an affordable price. So that's the low-income housing tax credit. There's also different federal grant programs, such as the Home Investment Partnership Program. So this is where individuals who are low income can get down payment assistance. And it, again, just really helps people who are in low income neighborhoods, and it's specifically targeted towards low income neighborhoods. So people not only have to be a resident in the neighborhood, but they also be purchasing a house in that neighborhood. The idea of this is that when you buy a house, you're kind of increasing your assets. So it's an investment in the long term. So the government's trying to incentivize people to purchase homes, and they're trying to get people an opportunity who are low income, who wouldn't otherwise be approved by a bank. So a lot of times people who are low income might not have enough down payment might not have enough money set aside for a down payment. So the government's kind of stepping in and providing them with some down payment assistance so that they can purchase a house. Neighborhood stabilization programs are another federal program. So these are where governments are, again, this is kind of similar to what I was talking about the Cleveland model before, where the government's kind of coming in and purchasing foreclosed houses or abandoned homes, and then they're rehabbing them to kind of stabilize the housing prices in the neighborhood. So these are just a few tools that local communities can have to really pull up the real estate and commercial value of their area. Financial capital is huge. So if we're thinking about financial capital, that's money. So it's like economic business development, again, pulling businesses in. So this might be revitalizing commercial retail space. They've done that, again, a lot in St. Louis, where Community Development Corporation kind of redid a community block in Old North St. Louis City to add in some business space so that commercial businesses kind of had a place to go. They also might provide small business loans. So there is a nonprofit in St. Louis called Justine Peterson who provides small business loans. So these are individuals, again, who might not be able to get a loan from a normal bank to just start up a small business. So it might be starting up a hot dog stand. It might be starting up a bookstore. It kind of varies based on the individual. But it's the idea that they're going to provide me $1,000 or say $10,000 to help me start up my business. And I'm then going to start up my business. I'm going to provide some commercial industry to the area, and then I'm going to pay my $10,000 back to them. So they're only loaning me the money. So they're not out $10,000. I'm going to pay it back, and then they're able to take my $10,000 and give it to someone else to start up a new business. So it's kind of like that multiplying effect where my $10,000 is going to help start 4 different businesses. Business incubators are another thing that different community development corporations might do. So business incubators are kind of like the idea of a shared workspace. So again, it's kind of helping small businesses get off the ground. There's a lot of small businesses who can't afford to pay rent. They're so small that they can't afford to pay for like an entire office. So what they do is they might have like 10 individual offices who, there's one small business per office, and then they share overhead. So they're sharing the printer costs. They're sharing having a meeting room space. They're sharing having a front desk assistant, someone who can help with meeting arrangements. So they've done things like this throughout the area. There's like a nonprofit incubator where very small nonprofits each have, one person businesses, one-person nonprofits, so they wouldn't be able to afford an entire office on their own. There was like a kitchen workspace, so all these individuals, I think they were, a lot of them were like caterers, so it was an incubator where not, one individual couldn't afford to pay for all of this, kitchen space, oven space. So they had like 10 people who were kind of combining their efforts, and they were able to get their business off the ground by having some communal space. Social enterprises are a new trend as well. So social enterprises are the idea that they're typically run by nonprofits, but they are businesses, and they have a social purpose behind them. So they're able to really improve the community by giving back. So one of the examples is in St. Louis, there's a social enterprise called Bridge Bread, and it used to be in partnership with the Bridge, which served homeless individuals. So what Bridge Bread does is it takes individuals who are homeless, it provides them with a job of making bread. So that's providing them with employment. It's also providing them with job training. So it's dually focused. And then they sell the bread throughout the community. They sell really just like they were any other commercial industry. But the money, the profit that they're using is going back to benefit society. So there's a lot of examples like that. And I'm sure they are throughout the area, not just in St. Louis. But Bridge Bread is one example. There was another, I think it was like sweet desserts. It was a social enterprise in which individuals with developmental disabilities made the desserts, and then the money that they sold them, it was a food truck, so it was a cupcake food truck. So they sold cupcakes, and then the money went back to pay for the individuals who had developmental disabilities who wouldn't otherwise have had a job. So these are just some ways that corporations can kind of increase financial capital of the area. So some current examples of community development corporations. We learned a lot about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative last week, so that was one example. Another example is the Cleveland model of community development. I'm not going to go into much detail here. What I would like you to do is to watch a short video about this. It just gives you another good, solid example of what community development corporations can do. In this example for the Cleveland model, what it does, it has an anchor institution. So in this situation, the anchor institution is the Cleveland Clinic. So that is your next lecture quiz question. So Cleveland Clinic is the anchor institution, and Cleveland Clinic has a stake in the community. So Cleveland Clinic is a large hospital system throughout Cleveland, and it wants to see the people do well, because as we've learned, people who live in lower income neighborhoods aren't going to be as healthy. They have less access to healthy food, less access to good jobs. There's higher crime in the area. So these anchor institutions want to see the people who live around them do well. So they essentially have a community development corporation paid through this anchor institution of the Cleveland Clinic. And they're working with nonprofit corporations, the government, the surrounding community, and they're also hiring the residents to work at Cleveland Clinic, all in a way to strengthen the area around them. Another example here in St. Louis is the Washington University Medical Center Redevelopment Corporation. Wow, that is a mouthful. It's a really long name, but essentially this is another example of funding by an anchor institution. So in this situation, the anchor institution of the Washington University Medical Center, which that is your next lecture question, final one. Washington University Medical Center is right in the middle of St. Louis, so it's near the Central West End. So some of the surrounding areas by this hospital system aren't the best. So they're trying to strengthen the area around it, because people don't want to go to a hospital that's in the middle of a high crime area. So they're trying to strengthen the community, the residents' skills around it, to essentially better themselves, because they have a stake in the community. So they do a variety of services. They provide social services such as youth activities, employment assistance, home repairs, public improvements such as neighborhood beautification, They helped put in street lights, better sidewalks. They have a huge interest in safety and security. So they helped employ like police officers who were not, they hired like off-duty police officers to provide additional like patrols around the neighborhood. And they also like formed together these like neighborhood watch groups to try to pull the neighborhood and try to give them more of a stake in the community. They did a lot with economic development by pulling in businesses and marketing the area, and a lot with housing. So they recently built a senior living facility. Again, they provide home repairs. They also provide employer assisted housing incentives. So they provide, I believe, down payment assistance. So individuals who work at Washington University receive down payment, a few $1,000s in down payment assistance if they purchase a house within, the surrounding zip codes of the medical center. So it's a great incentive to try to get their community members to stay in the area. So it's just one way that they're trying to strengthen the area and make sure that the people who are working there are kind of reaping the benefits. So it's kind of a hand in hand with the people who work there and the people who live in the surrounding community. Another example in Toledo would be NeighborWorks. So this is again in the Toledo neighborhood. They do a lot with affordable housing. Again, they provide financial assistance, home buying, repairs, preserving houses, and also weatherization services such as kind of teaching people how you can reduce your heating bills. So these are all different ways that they're kind of strengthening the housing of the area, real estate, and also the skills of the people who live there as a way to strengthen the community. Okay, our week 7 activities. What do we have coming up? So number 1, we have our lecture quiz. I've gone through the questions, so you should be solid there if you listen to the lecture. The second thing that I'd like you to do is to listen to the first 24 minutes of a webinar. I think that listening to this webinar will really just, again, reinforce what community development is and how community development corporations work with the surrounding community. So the entire webinar is like an hour long. The last 30 minutes is like them answering questions. So listen to the first 24 minutes. That will really strengthen your understanding. And then write a 1-page reflection that kind of discusses how community development initiatives help support social work practice. Because I think a lot of social workers, again, really think about the practice that they do on more of a clinical level. So it's really important to kind of see how these community development initiatives are really intertwined with social work and what we're doing as clinicians. So watch the first 24 minutes of that webinar. If you have any problems pulling the webinar up, please let me know. You have to download Adobe Connect in order to listen to it. Okay, most importantly, we have our evidence-based practice workbook due. This is due at the end of this week on March 8th. So this is due Thursday, March 8th at 11:59 p.m. I walked through the evidence-based practice workbook at the last lecture, so I don't feel the need to walk through it again. So please, if you are confused on the evidence-based practice workbook, watch the last 5 minutes of the last lecture, because I don't feel like repeating my words, and I don't feel like people want to listen to me repeat them. So that is extremely important. It's worth 10% of your final grade, so make sure that you take care of that. Yes. The other thing is the community meeting reflection that's due on March 29th. So make sure that you are looking at community meetings that are coming up in your area. I've already had several people email me. Thank you. Nice job to all of you who've emailed me. You do need to email me in advance with your lecture. With your community meeting. What community meeting are you going to be attending? You need advance permission. So make sure you are doing that, because most community meetings only meet once a month. And it is just about March, so we are 1 month away from that. So make sure you're taking advantage of the community meetings that are coming up. Any questions on the evidence-based practice workbook, please email me. I do not know if people are struggling with it unless I get emailed questions. So shoot me an email, or else please have that turned in by March 8th. that is all that I have. That's the end of this lecture. So I hope everyone has a great week, and I look forward to reading everyone's evidence-based practice workbooks. Thank you. Bye.